Well, now, Peter Cosgrove is back with me, and we're going to take some of the questions from our listeners, because, Peter, we were talking about interviewing for jobs and getting through all the obstacles that are put in your way. Just to confirm for us before we take the questions, you can have 3, 4, 5, 6, even 7 stages before you might be offered a job.
Yeah, I think some companies do have up to 7 or 8, and they talk about its importance for cultural fit, and you need to meet the whole team. Most research would say that once you go above 4 or 5, as a company, you're actually not doing yourself any favours.
You're wasting time.
Because eventually one of them is going to dislike something, and you're just going to reject more than you need to. So, but there's also a little bit, I hate to say it, there's a little bit of arrogance of some organisations going, you'll only be good enough if you do 12 interviews to get to see us, and, only 1 in 1,000 gets a job here. And I think we should be past that now, because companies can't afford to do that.
So how typical, though, is it that in the old days you sent in your CV, they read through it, and they either gave you an interview or they gave you the Dear John or Dear Joan letter? Yeah. How many companies now use high tech, really?
A lot of companies are still doing exactly that. The first bit of tech comes from the fact that often you can get so many CVs in that you don't have time to go through them all. Yeah. So they will have some way of actually maybe getting rid of ones that aren't, let's say, based in the country. Let's say if it's for a temporary job and starts tomorrow. Well, if you're not living in the country, there's no point even opening the CV. And then they'll start looking at certain keywords. They go, we've got 150 CVs. We only want to see a short list of 20 to go through. So there is a chance that you'll get knocked out of the process before you even see.
And do they inevitably ask them to be sent in by email so that they can machine scan them?
Yeah. I mean, there's almost no point to put in a letter now, because the first thing you'll be asked is, could you send it to me in email? It used to be seen as a nice touch. Now you kind of look like you don't have an email address and you're a bit out of touch. So it's probably not a good idea.
So that allows them also to do this automated process.
Yeah.
If that's the first one, an automated reading of your CV, what is the second process?
So what companies are now doing, there's huge business in this, where companies now are employing technology to everything from, let's say they get the 30 candidates they might be interested in. Then they will have a scheduling tool, so they won't do it, who will go out to the candidates and say, choose a time for interview. That will all happen automatically. Then they'll all maybe get sent a test automatically. They'll all fill the test in, and then the test results will come back.
And these are multiple choice.
Some could be psychological. Some, depending on the role, could be numerical or spatial reasoning if it's an architect or those sorts of roles. And then
there could be a clock on these tests.
There could be a clock on these tests. Yeah.
So you're told once you start the test, you've got 20 minutes or whatever, or 10 minutes to do this. So you can't kind of cheat it and pause the test and go off.
And they've ways to even check if it's been answered by somebody else. They're very, very good at this. But the fact is, once you've done that, then you might get to a stage of an interview. But now some of the interviews, Unilever, which would have been seen as quite an old style organisation, they've employed video interviews where actually the interview is done by a computer. Questions are automated, asked of you, and then they look at your facial responses. And then again, this was for the graduates, only 50% of the people get through that. So when you get to that stage, you've had a number of bots, technology, sourcing, scanning tools have all gone through before you're actually then at the human stage.
It's quite strange, because obviously if we're heading for full employment, and there are lots of graduates coming out and people with a bit of experience who are looking for the jobs, but all these filters are being used, eventually you've got to get to the point where the people who haven't been employed have to be picked up by the also-rans. Is that how...
Yeah, I mean, so I think a lot of this is for people who are in work. So a lot of these people who are looking for a job are trying to get somebody out of one job into their next job. So that's probably where a lot of this is coming from. But you're right, when you get down to 6.1%, there should be a job for most people out there. However, that doesn't mean it's easy. I mean, people who've been out of work for a while, people worry about everything from their gender to their age to the fact that they've been self-employed for a while, and all of those things can play. And if you don't interview very well, it can be a huge challenge, because people really put a lot of sway in that interview if you don't do well in it.
Now, some of the questions coming in, will you ask Peter, why are people over 50 years of age and unemployed overlooked for the vast number of jobs available? Looks like they want cheap labour from young kids who are easily led. Older people have many qualities that young people have yet to learn. This is getting to be a very serious issue nowadays, and it looks as if it is planned to keep older people out of jobs. So the point there, cheap labour, because you're only starting your career, you'll do the job for 25 grand a year. someone who's in their late 40s, early 50s will not work for that amount of money.
Yeah, the first thing to be aware of this is don't assume. So people spend a lot of time assuming that this is the reason they didn't get the job. Why? Because it's much nicer to believe that you didn't get the job because somebody discriminated against you rather than you weren't good enough. So that doesn't mean these people who are texting in weren't good enough. But the first thing is make sure you get the feedback that you were right for this job, that this person would have employed you and age was the issue here. Because a lot of times it's not.
But also the job spec, when you answer the ad, it should indicate not the age of the person they want, but the kind of experience build-up. And a 23-year-old is not going to have that.
Yeah, and I think the challenge is there's a lot of people who are older who maybe don't want to do a job which needs 20 years experience. They want to have one for 3 to 5 years experience. And unfortunately, a lot of interviewers, when they hear 3 to 5 years, they're thinking in their 20s as opposed to anyone out there. So gotta be careful.
A similar question. Please ask your expert about ageism, actual or perceived, in the recruitment process. Given that we're expected to work to our late 60s, many people may change jobs late in their careers. Although age discrimination is illegal and one is not required to state their age on a CV, I suspect that recruiters are biased towards younger and cheaper applicants, especially in the tech industry. I mean, it's if you give your CV, they can work out how old you are approximately by your employment history.
Oh, I mean, nobody wants to hear this, but I mean, absolutely discrimination happens. It doesn't happen, but what it doesn't do, it isn't happening overtly. It happens for the fact that people do it without knowing. They do it for age, gender, but they discriminate often because you're too young and you don't have experience. The one thing you need to be aware of is get past that. That is life. That is going to happen, and you need to give yourself the best chance. So if you're over 50, make sure you know technology well, make sure you're dressed for the part, make sure you tell them you're not looking for someone else's job, make sure you tell them you're happy to work for someone younger than you. Get all those things out of the way early.
How do you deal with a reference which is not a reflection of what you did, perhaps due to having to report to 2 different managers?
Yeah, I think this is clearly one of the managers didn't get on with this person and they're going to give them a bad reference. The first thing I'd say is the good news is so few people ask for references. It's frightening. It's incredible. It's probably one of the best tools to actually find out was someone good. They might have worked for 5 years for you, but people just don't ask as much.
Is there a problem with me committing something in a reference that might be defamatory?
Yeah, so most people will just either only give things like they worked from this date to that date. But we're in Ireland. The reality is, if you ring someone up and go off the record, what do you think? Even by the tone of their voice, you can find it out. Yeah. For this person here, I would say is overplay your references. Get about 4 different references and 4 different jobs, personal, private. And if you've got 4 people who are immediately going, wow, this person's got lots of references, I don't even need to check with that. And maybe leave out this one in particular.
I work in an office and some of our responsibilities are now being automated through computers and new software that the company is installing. And in the meantime, more of the smaller jobs that can't be done by tech are being passed on to us human workers, which are now expected to be done to a higher standard. Basically, our jobs are being negotiated to accommodate the new software.
Well, it's not exactly that. The reality is all companies, if they can get technology to do a job, they will. So all jobs eventually that can be done by a robot or technology will be. And there's no other reason as in it's cheaper for organizations.
But also robots don't make mistakes by and large.
So what they're probably going to do though is the more boring parts of the job. So if you take the recruitment piece, they're great at doing scheduling of interviewing and going through thousands of CVs, but they don't do the actual face-to-face interview generally, the more kind of intuitive part. So, but the one thing I would say to this listener is you've got to learn, you've got to continue to upskill.
I'm a self-employed accountant looking to make a move into an employed position. I'm nervous about moving into a more structured environment and if my skills are up to scratch. I've been self-employed for 15 years. Any advice there?
I'd say the first thing is skills I can't advise on. You probably just need to look at any job spec and see if you're right for it. But
there would be, say, accounting programs that are now standard in the big offices.
Yeah, but for me, much more big thing if you're self-employed is whether you're going to be comfortable working for a boss, working from 9 to 5 or scheduled hours, because you've had a lot of autonomy. But the flip side is you'll get a lot of benefits working with other people, learning, but you've got to balance those things up.
I've been in my job for 17 years and haven't studied or even opened a book for longer than that. Should I be trying to upskill because all of these new digital things that are replacing human jobs, will this help me secure my job in the future?
Yeah, you absolutely need to be upskilling. I mean, it's frightening. If you've gone 17 years and you haven't opened a book, the reality is if your job is replaced, what are you going to do now? And then you're going to get quite upset that your job, the next job, you're going to get a lot less of a salary. So be aware of that. You need to be learning.
Recently, I heard some advice given to someone who was wanting to know, should I learn Excel, for example? And they said, well, not necessarily, because the big companies all have their own spreadsheet programs.
Yeah.
So no point in learning one if you're going to have to learn another.
Well, the learning itself is helpful because it'll keep your brain nimble and so forth. So I wouldn't have an issue with that. But the reality is the bigger skills to learn are influencing, persuading, anything that's people-based, because those skills aren't going to go out of fashion anytime soon.
My son and daughter have both been offered a place on a graduate program in one of the big accountancy firms. However, they're in the exact same intake in the same department. Should I suggest that they ask to be separated, because I feel it's a bit too close for comfort? Now, I don't know whether Teresa, who's asking the question, wants to suggest to the company they separate them, or to suggest to the son and daughter that they each say, look, that the brothers here, maybe it's...
I would think that the company might actually, once they, because they mightn't notice, once they realise they may actually separate them, but actually it kind of depends on how well they got on. There could be a benefit having a colleague there or someone you know well, a confidant, but I would say it's probably better to be in two different departments.
Do I need a photo on my CV from Clara?
No, 100%. 100% no.
No.
You get judged in a photo. If there's no photo there, you can't get judged. The only place you have to have a photo is LinkedIn, because they make you have one there. Otherwise, you don't get found on LinkedIn.
A question on my screen. Is LinkedIn a key to job searching nowadays?
It is these days for a lot of jobs. Not every sector, but all the kind of more professional services sector, it's probably the first place a lot of recruiters are looking. So absolutely.
So if you're not on LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn.
And be an all-star on LinkedIn, which is having a 100% profile.
I'm about to finish my undergrad and I'm in the process of applying for jobs. I'm confused about my CV. Should it be one pages, or does it depend on the field of work that you're working in? That's from Dave.
People always worry about pages. If you're less than 10 years experience, like 700 to 800 words. People can only read at the same speed, regardless of how small or big the font is. So focus on 700 to 800 words. That should never go past 2 pages. So that's what I would say, rather than worrying about pages.
What's the best way to prepare for a job interview?
The first thing is, most questions at a job interview get asked. The first question always asked is, "Tell me about yourself." Most people don't even prepare that one. Speaking for 2 to 3 minutes, fluidly. Strengths, weaknesses, why, any questions for us. So I would prepare all those. But here's the thing that people don't do: they don't speak their questions out loud. Speak them out loud, and then put a phone on yourself and watch yourself. It's uncomfortable, but why not make those mistakes? Twist over your words. Get all the mistakes out of the way on a phone in your room, rather than in the live event. So people kind of feel, I'll just wing it, I'll be fine on the day. So prepare.
Is it necessary to ask a question at the end of an interview when they ask, do you have any questions for us?
Yes, because everybody knows the question's coming. So their view is, even if you don't feel you should, if there isn't a question on the tip of your tongue, they're going, they feel you're not interested in the company and you haven't really done any research.
And questions not to ask, like, how long are my holidays?
Yeah, how many sick days am I allowed?
How many sick days am I I've had to put my date of birth on a civil service application recently, says someone. I presume you would put your date of birth on a CV, would you?
Yeah, the thing is, you don't have to, but the reality is, and this is terrible, but most people interviewing you still care about what age you are. They kind of want to know, because they want to know you're fit of the team. So even though you don't need to do it, most people will work it out anyway. So I'm not saying, and I don't really believe there's a benefit of not putting it on there.
My son is doing an internship in London, not being treated very well, being made do all sorts of tasks that should be done by someone who's paid a proper salary. I want him to speak up and say it's not fair, but he's afraid it will reflect badly upon him. What should he do? That's from Cora. In other words, they're using a cheap intern to do the job of a proper employee.
Yeah, the tricky things about internships is, even when you're not being paid, if a company's doing it the right way, they're giving you a lot of experience and you should be learning. If the job you're doing is not helping you learn, you're not getting anything from it, you're literally being an unpaid resource, which should be paid, you just should be leaving.
But if you intern once. You don't intern twice.
No, exactly. So the whole point is, this should be leading to a job in the organisation or a job somewhere else, and it should be for a specific period of time. But I think that has to be talked about, otherwise you're going to be taken for a ride.
Why do so many places need degrees for the simplest of jobs? I've been unemployed since March, finding it impossible to find a job in what I have experience in, because I do not have a degree. I'm finding it disheartening now.
It's terrible, because if you go to most job specs and then you look at the senior management team and ask them how many of them have a degree, you'll often find 30 or 40% don't. So what we're asking the new crop isn't always reflective of the rest of the organisation. The one thing I would say to do is, you can't get a degree tomorrow, but you could actually start applying and looking for them. So even on your CV, if it says says applying for a degree at the moment, if nothing else, it'll have the word degree in your CV.
Okay. Well, so the bot will see that. Should you always dress formally for an interview, or can you dress to reflect the culture of the company? That's what made me. And you know, a lot of the tech companies very casual.
I would always dress formally unless they tell you otherwise. There's nothing
can dress
worse
down on the Friday if you want.
Yeah, but it's nothing worse than if you do arrive in and the person is more formal than you are. So you never look bad in a suit unless they tell you not to wear one.
I'm reviewing CVs for a role in IT. The standard of CV formatting is awful, and for a role where attention to detail is important, I reject CVs with spelling mistakes, says John in Dublin.
Yeah, and people need to realise, I mean, you can spend as long as you want in your CV. You can get as many people to look at them as possible. You can get someone to pay to write your CV for you. So this is why companies are going, if you can't even bother to get something right that you can spend as much time as you want on, why would I ever expect you to do a job for me that's good? So be aware of that. Spelling mistakes do affect a lot of employers.
Should I send a thank you email after an interview? Will that help me get at least a response? I've interviewed loads, never heard back. Would a follow-up email saying thank you influence a response?
Possibly, but the reality is probably not. The reason most companies don't follow up, because if they follow up with one, they have to follow up with hundreds. So that's just the way it is.
Just a news story today about age discrimination. Ireland's equality watchdog has issued guidance on the use of compulsory retirement ages, which it warned could be a form of discrimination. Under Irish and EU law, imposing a compulsory retirement age constitutes less favourable treatment on the ground of age, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission has said. Imposing a mandatory retirement age can be justified under the law, but only if it meets the objective justification test, meaning that it is a proportionate measure for achieving the legitimate aims of the company.
Yeah.
That's EU speak.
Yeah, look, the main thing is in 20 or 30 years' time, as we've less people being born, we're going to need more older workers in the workforce. So companies should get used to the fact that we're going to have a greying of our population, and therefore we're going to have a greying of our workforce. Secondly, they can do great jobs at every level, and we just need to kind of get rid of that immediate kind of bias that we often have.
All right, Peter Cosgrove of CPL, thank you very much for joining us.